Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
And Joe, coming off just another incredible baseball weekend, and something I never thought I'd be saying, both of our teams made the College World Series. And not only did both of our teams make the College World Series, they get to play each other in the first game, which of course is, adding a lot of rivalry to our friendship right now, also to my marriage right now. So that's great. They really just did a great job with, putting these matchups in there, just like you always said is what they do. And really interesting game one we have in the College World Series when the Rebs and Auburn take on each other. But let's start off before we get into previewing what's going to be an amazing week in Omaha. We're talking about what happened in the Southern Miss Regional. Joe, I mean, we talked about, I think both of us thought that Ole Miss was ultimately going to win this regional. But we did not think that it was going to be the embarrassment it was for the Golden Eagles. 0 runs scored. Neither one of the games appeared very competitive, especially if you're looking at it just on the stat sheet and you weren't watching it closely. And that was a really tough loss for Scott Berry, who's built an amazing program in Hattiesburg, and he seems like just a great guy. And, of course, I wanted Ole Miss to win, but I really hated seeing it be like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Southern Miss being, the hometown team for me, a top 5 team as far as my favorite teams out there in college athletics. Always keep up with them, went to a lot of games growing up in Hattiesburg. And you hated to see it. And we were talking about before the show, I was telling you that I feel that like a casual observer, maybe somebody that's like a Stanford fan, if they see the final score of 10-0 and 5-0 and USM shut out, like they're thinking Ole Miss just dominated, which they did. But the other side of the story is that USM just did not cash in on opportunities early on in game one. You think about just how colossal that call was on the grand slam that was ruled a foul ball. Like that could have changed the tide of the series. I know that was something you were definitely thinking about.
Well, Joe, I mean, you think about it, at that point, Ole Miss was winning 5-0. And I really thought that was a grand slam. I mean, I've had people on both sides tell me what they thought. But to me, it really appeared that it was on the left side of the foul pole when it was good. And at that point, it goes from being 5-0 to 5-4. And I don't think there was any outs when that happened either. I think there was 0 outs. And instead, they got 0 runs. I mean, it was like when the umpires reviewed it for 5 minutes, ultimately decided to stick with the call they had before. It was like the complete bottom dropped out of Southern Miss's team. And up to that point, they had hung pretty well with Ole Miss. Even though they hadn't scored any runs, they kept having a lot of base runners on and not capitalizing. And you kind of feel like that was their last chance. And it ended up being, if it could possibly be bigger than what it was, a grand slam not going your way, it kind of ended the series for them.
It really did, because another part of the story is that the USM pitching staff, the starters, Hurston Waldrop and Tanner Hall on Sunday, I mean, they pitched really well in their starts. Waldrop had 12 strikeouts against Ole Miss on Saturday in game one. And if you would have told me he would have had 12 strikeouts, I mean, I would have thought USM probably wins that game. I would not have expected 10 runs from Ole Miss with a 12 strikeout performance. And so you think about going back to that foul ball call. It really wasn't until Ben McDonald, the color commentator, said that he thought he saw the ball on the right side of the foul pole that I even considered that it was a foul ball. Like from the naked eye, from my vantage point, kind of like we were texting, I thought it was pretty clear that that ball went behind the foul pole and went into the trees. So I really thought it was a home run. And I personally really didn't see anything conclusive to tell me otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, the way I saw it is, let's say this was the foul pole. It crossed just that way and disappeared behind it. That's what I kept seeing. Like every time I watched that replay.
I saw it disappear. That was the key thing. And then reappear.
Exactly. I mean, and so I thought there's no way that you could see it disappear unless it was fair to begin with.
Yes.
But obviously, they just went with the ruling they had on the field. And I know that was particularly upsetting one for Southern Miss fans. And it just, it never got better and they never recovered from it.
No, they did. They didn't. And like I said, they still have a talented team. To me, this is a team that just ended up against the hottest team in the country right now in the Super Regional. And I think I said on the show last week that I was worried from USM's standpoint about the immense pressure they were going to feel in this in-state rivalry game. They've never hosted a Super Regional before. And so it's like, oh my goodness, we got to take advantage of this. And by golly, we're playing Ole Miss. It's like, an even hotter ticket. And I just think that it was such a hot ticket. I told you about how ticket prices were going for $300. I saw tickets for $1,800. It was insane how expensive it was to get into that game on Saturday and Sunday. And I feel like it was an anxious crowd, though, Dan. It wasn't a riled up crowd. The Southern Miss fans were anxious on every pitch. And I feel like the players kind of felt that tension. Whereas the Ole Miss side, it was complete 180. I mean, Ole Miss is normally a program you think that would be nervous in those situations. But here they were so loose because I think they kind of view this NCAA tournament as kind of a gift, and they're just trying to take advantage of it.
Yeah, Joe. I mean, I think Ole Miss has been playing with house money since day one. They probably felt like they didn't deserve to make the NCAA tournament. There was a lot of arguments as to why they didn't. They got in, and no one thought they could beat Arizona. No one thought they could beat Miami, but they did it. And suddenly they're here. Now they're taking on an in-state program that's having, its best season ever in terms of where they've been ranked all season long, hosting their first Super Regional. And Ole Miss had no reason to be worried because even if they lost, no one was going to consider that a bad season for them. Yet for Southern Miss, their fans have the pinnacle moment of, I guess, maybe even their sports history, if you think about it, like across all sports, paying the most money for these tickets. Everyone's watching. And you're right, they were nervous. And it was funny. I even had Southern Miss fans tell me, like, when I said, "This is a bad day for Southern Miss," they said, "Well, every day is bad for Southern Miss." It's like when it happened, they weren't even that surprised about it. It's like they were expecting for that shoe to drop the whole time, and then it just did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think also the players kind of felt the mindset, if we don't take advantage of this opportunity, when will we ever get an opportunity like this again? And if you're Ole Miss, you're like, this is house money. There's a good chance with the trajectory of our program, we'll probably be back in a Super Regional next year, maybe even getting to host it at Swayze Field. And so I think all those factors. And then finally, Dan, another component I didn't hear enough people talk about as far as the broadcast is I feel like in most years when Ole Miss takes on USM, they play them in a midweek scenario where you're getting like the fourth and fifth best starting pitchers. And here you saw a weekend series where it was the head-to-head, the ones against the ones as far as the starters. And I really think that Ole Miss's pitching staff from an SEC caliber, you saw DeLucia, you saw Elliott look really, really good. I think they're playing really well, pitching well, but also don't think USM had seen like an SEC ace of that caliber this season.
Well, that's a good point, Joe. I mean, when you're playing in the midweek, you're not getting the ones and twos. And so even when they play Ole Miss, they play Mississippi State at that point, they're not getting their best players. And here you're getting the A number ones. And you saw it. I mean, Elliott and DeLucia are both pitching just excellent right now. And I really thought, especially in game two, Elliott just completely shut him down. I mean, he had one hit by the time that he left in the seventh inning. I kind of was hoping they'd let him go the full game just so I could see it. You never see them let pitchers go full games anymore, but that was one that I thought kind of warranted it.
Yeah. I was thinking there was a good chance when he got into the eighth inning, and it really kind of amazes me that they only used 4 pitchers the entire weekend. Like Ole Miss didn't even have to pitch their closer, Brandon Johnson. And coming into the series, I thought Ole Miss would win. But I thought we were set up, for at least like a 5-4 game or something like that at some point where you have to kind of hold on for dear life. And that just really did not happen at all.
Well, Joe, speaking of tight series, I mean, we never got to see that with Ole Miss and with Southern Miss. But on the flip side of this epic SEC West showdown we have in the College World Series, Auburn had to travel out to Corvallis, Oregon, which I've heard described as the moon. I've heard described as Hansel and Gretel land because it's so woodsy and there's nothing there. And apparently, all those things, Auburn had to travel 3,000 miles to get out there. Apparently, because of all the things going on, graduation and various other things, they had to drive an hour every single day to and from their hotel to play in these games. You add that in, and they won just an epic series against a very good Oregon State team where every game went down to the wire. And you never felt good about it one way or the other, either fan base. And it was truly one of the best baseball series I've ever seen in my entire life. Just every single game was so tight. And in the end, it came down to the fact that Auburn scored runs when they had base runners on, and Oregon State just kept stranding runners. I mean, in game one, you saw it to a decent extent, but Auburn was still hitting really well in game one. They were on such a fiery streak, of course, scoring 51 runs in the regional, but then they come in against this very excellent pitching staff of Oregon State, and they get 7 in the first game, then they get 3 in the second and 4 in the third. And basically from, I think it would have been like the 6th inning on in the first game, I think Auburn only had 7 runs the rest of the series. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, it was definitely, you could see how good Oregon State is. And you and I talked about this before the show. If Oregon State were still in this tournament, I think they would be the odds-on favorite to win it right now.
Yeah, I mean, their roster would bode well for the Omaha setting with Jerpy, their ace, the offense that they have. They get probably a lot of doubles, a lot of triples in that stadium. So, yeah, it definitely opens the door up for really just anybody to have a chance to win the national title without Tennessee there, obviously, as well. But, yeah, last week, I really did not see a scenario where Auburn could win this series. I thought maybe they could get a game, but I was dead wrong. I mean, they definitely pleasantly surprised me with this performance. I look at just how close the games were to your point, and to be able to go on the road in that environment. Oregon State, they take their baseball so seriously, having 3 national championships program. They kind of remind me almost like, on some degree, like a West Coast version of like a Mississippi State, because they don't do much in football, but like their baseball is like their sport. And so to go in there into that environment and to win, if you're Auburn, that definitely impressed me.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, when you watch those games, I mean, the environment was fantastic. The field is huge. You can tell it's like, it's new. They've done a lot of updates to it. It's different because, I mean, there were people wearing hoodies. It was so cold. It was in the 50s and 60s compared to here where you're getting heat indexes in the hundreds like every day. And the fans are really loud and into it. And what's even more amazing to me, Joe, is that unlike what we've seen at Florida State, the transition plan for Oregon State has worked. This is not their coach that won their 3 national championships. It's a successor. And his successor was a guy who played for him on 2 of those national championship teams, that understands the culture, and he's continued it and doing a really great job. And I think he's only in his early 40s. He was on the teams that won it in 2006 and 2007, I think. So he might even be in his late 30s.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the program Pat Casey built. And yeah, I mean, it's huge to have that good succession plan, because some programs, just don't do that normally.
No. And, you heard Pat Casey get interviewed. He's still a very big part of the Oregon State Beaver program. He's there for all the games. And you could just see that when Auburn got there, I could tell from like the very first pitch and seeing the atmosphere that we were going to have a long road to haul to win the series. And they got off to a hot start, got the lead, but Oregon State answered immediately, and you could tell they weren't going to be an easy team to kill. And then in that game too, when I saw what Cooper Jerpy had, that guy is definitely going to be a pro baseball player and probably a future all-star at pitching. He's fantastic.
Yeah, he's really good. Reminds me of Chris Sale, who's been really good with the White Sox and Red Sox, kind of with his delivery and being a left-handed pitcher. But yeah, I mean, you look at Auburn going into that environment, especially with the pitching for Auburn. I didn't think that their pitching would be good enough to win a series against that type of offense as well. But on the offensive side, I'm really excited, for the storyline that's going to be Sonny D advancing the College World Series. I feel like if Auburn could go on a run, or even regardless, just being in the College World Series, you're going to see him, I think, kind of become a household story.
Well, Joe, I mean, locally, he is a household story already because he's a Hoover High School graduate, where friend of the show Kent played at, and his brother Sam, who played for Mississippi State. Hoover High School has won all kinds of state championships in baseball. He's also a guy who started out his career at Samford and Birmingham and then transferred to Auburn. So he had to work his way up to even being on Auburn's team. And you look at what he did in that series last weekend. We talked about how hot hitting they were in the regional where they scored 51 runs. Well, in this series, Oregon State's pitchers had Auburn figured out. Basically, after the middle of the game one, not much was happening for Auburn's hitters. And in game three, Auburn had a 2-run home run from Sonny D, a walk from Sonny D where he ends up scoring, and then also a hit. And there were a hit to the opposite field when he saw that the players had moved and switched locations to try and anticipate where he was hitting it. And there were only 3 hits that Auburn had in that entire game, and Sonny D had 2 of them. And what I thought was really the biggest point of that game was when Butch Thompson called the squeeze bunt play. You don't see it very often, but when it works, I think it's the most exciting play in baseball. And the last run that Auburn got was a squeeze bunt. They got him to that 4 spot, and then they just had to hold on because I talked about Milton, who was the Pac-12 Player of the Year for the Beavers, that was the hitter. They also had Forrester, but their third best player was on an 18-game hitting streak, and that's their third best hitter. And Boyd hit a home run to get him from 4-1 to 4-3. And it got so tense that they took the starter out, and the guy that came in to fulfill the starter was able to get them out of a situation where you had 2 runners on and 1 out. And then you get to the 7th inning, and they have to bring in their all-star closer, Burkhalter, for Auburn, when it's the same situation, except now it's 2 runners on and no outs. And he gets 3 outs in a row. And the most impressive part of what Burkhalter did was when he comes in the 9th inning, he has to take on Milton, Forrester, and Boyd all in a row, and he strikes them all out. I mean, so, it was like you got to see one shining star on offense and one shining star on defense. You got to see Burkhalter be an amazing closer, and you got to see Sonny D being, frankly, the majority of the offense for Auburn and the Oregon State Super Regional.
Yeah, that's right, Dan. Very well said. And yeah, Burkhalter, to close the door with that offense in that environment, clinging to a 1-run lead. I mean, that's as good as it gets in a closing effort. One of the better closing efforts I've ever seen. How many times do you see road environments like that with a team clinging to a 1-run lead and it goes into extra innings, or like the other team gets a walk-off? Like Texas State was in that same scenario, I think, against Stanford in the regional round, where they got a lead going into the bottom of the 9th and they just couldn't hold it. Stanford ended up walking them off. So credit Auburn being able to hold them off.
That's right, Joe. I mean, that was a Herculean effort. And I'll be honest, when I saw who was coming up to bat in the 9th inning and thinking to myself that as good as Burkhalter is, which I think he's he's named the first team closer for the SEC, I didn't know that he could go in and do that for 3 innings. That's a lot to ask for a closer, and especially at the very end. But what an amazing performance he had to close it out in that clutch situation.
And that was good, too, of Thompson to manufacture a run, like you talked about with the bunt, the squeeze bunt, because I've never been as much of a proponent of bunting like early in a game. Like, I don't like it when teams bunt with no outs, because then I think you can kind of, give outs away. But if you have a situation with a runner on third, I feel like you've got to get them in. And that was definitely a good move.
That's right. I mean, and, it comes off of Sonny D getting walked. He can barely run. He pulls a hamstring. And luckily enough, the only other hit of the game that he doesn't have, somebody hits one into left field and you get a double that brings home 2 runs. And then they follow it up by getting the guy from third home with the squeeze bunt. And that turns out to be exactly what we needed, because the very next inning was when Boyd hit the 2-run home run to make it 4-3.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Joe, you were talking about how hard it can be to close out a team, that's really good, usually on the road. But when you're the underdog, when you have that chance, you're only up by 1. I mean, all I can think about is how sad that was for East Carolina, because we talked about how disappointing that, was for Southern Miss. getting to host that regional. Well, they didn't play very well in that series. Meanwhile, East Carolina played a game in 1.99 games perfect against a great Texas team. And they went out there and waxed Texas in game one. And in game two, it was looking the exact same way. And it just, they had a 5-run lead and Texas just slowly chipped into it. And then at the very end, Texas got the lead and won. And then you knew what was going to happen in game three.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like, to compare and contrast it, the vibe in Hattiesburg has been obviously, utter disappointment. But there's also, some layer of positivity where it's like, this was a cool event to host, good for the economy, we'll be back kind of thing. And also the USM program's been to the College World Series before. Mm-hmm. However, on the flip side, if you're East Carolina as a program, at some level, you're like, what else do I need to do to get over the hump? I mean, this is the 4th super regional loss for Cliff Godwin, the head coach. And 2 of them have been in just heartbreaking game 3 scenarios just like this. And it's like, is it just not meant to be? That's what I would honestly wonder if you're East Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, you and I were texting throughout it. I was blown away by Cliff Godwin's coaching ability. He had those guys playing so hard. And I knew I was watching the game and the announcers gave him the onus. It was like the 6th inning and they were winning by 5 runs. And you heard the guy say, they can feel it here in Greenville, South Carolina. They know their team's going to the College World Series. You could sense it in the air. And when he said that, I was like, no, dude, you did not just say that, because now I know Texas is going to come back and win this game now.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, I mean, it was like right from that moment that Texas just exploded.
Yes. I was so concerned about that too. And just Texas as a program like that was a tricky one to be hosting. Like, you feel like against, a lot of other teams wouldn't have the same name brand, maybe it would have been different animal as well. Just something about Texas, just hard to put a program like that away with their immense history. And it was quite, the contrast where you have Texas of all programs at East Carolina, who's never, been to the World Series.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, East Carolina, despite going to the super regionals all the time, this was their first chance to go to the College World Series. And they had a crowd that was equal to Hattiesburg. You could see how excited the people were. I mean, like, there were all kinds of real old-time baseball fans, you could tell, that have been supporting their Pirates for a long time, who were just ready for that moment. And then it just disappeared with the Hispanic Titanic hitting home runs, with all the talent that you had on that Texas team. And Joe, you're right. I mean, when it comes to college baseball, Texas is the bluest of the blue bloods. They've been to more College World Series than any other program. And that was always going to be a tough job for East Carolina to be able to finish that one. But, you got to that point where suddenly they were winning. They had it like dead to rights. And as soon as that announcer said that, it just seemed like things just kept going off their heels. And you knew they had 0 chance in game 3 once they blew that big lead in game 2.
Yeah. Knew it was hopeless in game 3. Yeah, I saw 2 quick things. I saw a stat that Texas, I think, is like 37 or 38 College World Series appearances. And I think that's the same number as like the other 7 teams combined in the World Series this year. And then the other thing I was going to say, I will credit, Cliff Godwin at East Carolina, from the standpoint that, to win the game, you've got to get there. And they've been knocking on the door, very similar to how Mike Bianco's done so many times at Ole Miss. But I do think this was probably Godwin's best coaching job, because they didn't have a whole lot of star power from a pitching perspective. And I think their ace pitcher was like lost even before the season due to some type of suspension. And so in order for them to make it as far as they did was definitely a great coaching job, but obviously hard, to find any solace the way it played out.
Absolutely. I mean, Texas is so powerful that I remember last year when Mississippi State won their national championship, that series they had against Texas was so tight. And I remember thinking when I was watching that, I was like, if Mississippi State can beat Texas, I think this team actually can win a national championship. That was the first time that I watched them, and I thought, wow, this team can win a national championship. If you can beat Texas in the College World Series, you can do it. And so, East Carolina was right there and just wasn't quite their time.
That's right.
But Joe, it was the time for another team that no one actually expected to win. I mean, technically, East Carolina was the 8th seed and Texas was the 9th seed, but everybody knows East Carolina was a big underdog. Not like the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, who I bet if you went to Vegas and tried to take odds on them beating Tennessee, I bet it was at least a 10-1 payout, if not more than that, because nobody thought they had a chance against what many had deemed the best college baseball team of all time. And how fitting was it that Notre Dame was the one to take out the bad guys, the ones that everybody thinks had zero class, the awful fans. Did you see the shirts, Joe? The classless versus the Catholics versus the classless that everybody was wearing at the games. It was
Yeah.
great because it made me think of, Catholics versus convicts. That's what it was takeoff on. But what
Yeah.
was even more epic was that literally in the 6th inning of the first game, the Tennessee fans were already throwing stuff out on the field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was pretty crazy. Just a wild turn of events in that first game, too, with the ejection and everything. But yeah, Notre Dame kind of has a recipe for as a program is, not just with baseball, but, their basketball teams had some notable upsets. I think they ended UCLA's streak back in like the 70s with Digger Phelps when they had the big streak, I think, winning wise under John Wooden. So, yeah, I mean, Notre Dame definitely shocked the world. This program, I think they've been to the College World Series 2 other times, but I mean, I kind of looked at them as a footnote heading into this series. I was actually probably a little bit surprised that they even won their regional against Georgia Southern. I can't remember who else was in that regional as well. But I heard the announcers talk about how Notre Dame went on the road last year against Mississippi State and took them to 3 games and kind of, the experience they took from that when going to Knoxville.
Yeah, they did. I mean, I remember that being a very tight series. I watched all of that one too. And they went toe to toe with Mississippi State, who was the ultimate national champion. And they didn't blink against Tennessee. They came out hot. They knew they had to win that game 1. And I mean, it was one of those things where you could tell Tennessee was a sleeping giant that just didn't quite wake up, because Notre Dame got out to, I think, like an 8-0 lead in that game. But Tennessee came back and made it, I think, 8-5 at the end of it. And then, everybody knew it was going to happen in game 2, which was Tennessee was going to come out blazing, and they did. But then in that game 3, I mean, Notre Dame's bats is what won the game, which is not what we would have expected, because Tennessee was a team that was best in the country in both hitting and pitching, that's quite a combination there. But everybody thought about their hitting. That's the thing you thought about first. And Notre Dame really was the one that out hit them. They didn't have the best pitching throughout that entire series, but the Notre Dame bats came alive, and they had multiple players that had multiple home runs in that series.
That's right. I would also add 2 other thoughts. So from a pitching standpoint, you look at Notre Dame hitting the ball well against the Tennessee pitchers. I was concerned all season about Tennessee kind of going after the SEC record for most wins. They got to 25-5. They didn't quite reach the record, but all year long, I feel like they pressed their pitchers. Like they pitched a lot of innings. Like you look at Ole Miss right now, I think one thing that's helping Elliott and DeLucia is that they actually started the season out of the bullpen. And so they don't have as many innings on their arms. These Tennessee pitchers, I mean, they've been going for it all season long. And so their arms have got to be taxed. Like that's the issue when you try to go after these record-breaking seasons in baseball. You just kind of wear down. It's such a long season. And then the other thing, from a historical perspective, I was trying to think about, Dan, where does this upset rank as far as some of the other, just great college baseball teams that didn't make it to Omaha? Think about Arkansas last year was a surprise. I would also put as a candidate a couple of the good Vanderbilt teams. In 2013, Vanderbilt went like 26-3. They're the team that set the SEC record for most wins. They went 26-3 and lost in the Super Regional. But I think the ultimate for me that might even top this Tennessee team, like it's really close. Vanderbilt in 2007 had David Price, who has been a star pitcher at the next level, Mike Minor, who pitched for the Braves, Pedro Alvarez, who played with the Pirates. Those 3 guys were like all-American candidates. Like I think Minor and Price in 2007 were combined like 20-2 as starters. Like they just lit it up. I think David Price had almost 200 strikeouts that season. To put that into perspective, I think Cooper Jerpy has 150 strikeouts this year. David Price like 200. And that team in 2007 for Vanderbilt got upset in the regional against Michigan. And so I still look at that as probably the most shocking result I can remember in college baseball history, to lose in the regional round. But this Tennessee upset is a close second.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I'd heard that, Tennessee was having kind of a similar situation where standing room only tickets were $300 to go to the super regional in Knoxville. They were so excited about it. And you and I talked about it all season, that we kind of felt like they were too good. We talked about what happened to Arkansas last year. And I said Tennessee was not going to win the national championship this year. I said it multiple times. I said, as good as they are, their style of baseball does not lend itself to a national championship team. It may at some point in the future, but I feel like, the karma is going to come back and get you eventually. The kind of stuff they did, throwing bats at people, going after umpires, bumping them, throwing stuff on the field, having a player, curse out an umpire during a game, which is why that guy got, booted from the game right there. And you just kind of felt like it was eventually going to go the other way on them. And like I said, it was very fitting that it was Notre Dame to finish the job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and you also know about the stigma when it comes to the number one overall seed in these tournaments. Like, they just don't have a good track record. I think Miami won the whole thing as the number one seed in '99. Like, that's the only one that's ever done it. And you feel like the teams that are going to have the best chance in this tournament are teams that obviously get hot at the right time. And the ones, they're really good, but they're just not getting all the media attention.
Absolutely. I mean, you and I said before this tournament started that Arkansas was a team that we thought had a great chance to win the College World Series. Coming in as a 2 seed, they had this epic team last year that couldn't quite get it done. They didn't quite get to their expectations this year. Maybe it's arguable they should have hosted, but they ended up choosing Oklahoma State over them. That gave them a little bit of extra motivation, had to have them work a little bit harder, and they're playing great baseball. You talk about Auburn, that's a team that had a really good regular season, kind of ended on a bad note, but they got hot and suddenly their hitting's going well. They found some really solid pitchers too at the end of the year, and suddenly it's working for them. Ole Miss is a team that always had a lot of talent, but they hit their peak and then the complete bottom dropped out, but they found it at the right time. Meanwhile, Tennessee's just been up here the entire season. There's been no dip, and there's been nothing to wake them up to reality. And they didn't get that. They didn't get that scare that they needed to get back in it. By the time they got that scare, they were down 0-1 to Notre Dame, and suddenly they had to win 2 games in a row.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's just so much of a grind too. I mean, that SEC tournament, I think, wore on them. Like, yeah, they won it, but like they had some late start times like throughout that tournament. They were starting like at 9:30, 10 o'clock. And like I said, just that pressure for perfection, trying to go through the gauntlet of winning the regular season title, winning the SEC tournament title. I just think that kind of wore on the team too.
Right, Joe. And now we're seeing it. We have a College World Series set up where we have 4 teams from the SEC West, and none of those teams are Tennessee that make the College World Series. What's even crazier is, 2 or 3 years from now, whenever Oklahoma and Texas are allowed to lead the Big 12, you could have 6 teams that were all from the SEC West that are in Omaha right now. And really, you got 2 outliers. You got Notre Dame that's representing the Midwest, and then Stanford that's the one Pac-12 team, which, they were the number 2 overall seed. They're definitely a team that not a lot of people have talked about. They had to gut out some victories. Like you said, they almost lost to Texas State. They had to win 3 games against UConn. And that could be an interesting team right there, because they've been living on the edge. They've been a team that arguably has not been playing their best baseball throughout the regionals and super regionals, but they have all this talent, and they had to score a lot of runs at the end to get back in it. Maybe they got a little spark right now.
Yeah, they're definitely somebody you have to take very seriously. They're one of only 2 host teams to win a super regional this past weekend. You look at 6 of the 8 teams on the road won the Super Regional. I guess that's just baseball. And looking at Stanford, though, specifically, I feel like one advantage they're going to have is they have a lot of pitching depth, a lot of different arms they can throw at you. I think that's going to help them in that big ballpark. Yeah, I think that they're definitely going to be a very formidable challenger. And I think we were talking about before the show, them and Texas are 2 of the heavy favorites heading into the series.
That's right, Joe. And what's funny about it is that sitting there at the very least odds you have to win it, or Texas A&M has the lowest odds, the number 5 overall seed, and then Auburn's got the second highest odds against them. Which, when you look at how they played, that doesn't exactly seem like it's right. But you're looking at, obviously Tennessee was going to be the overwhelming favorite. And Joe, I think if Oregon State had made it through this, they would be an overwhelming favorite to win this College World Series. And now at this point, people don't really know who to pick to win it.
Yeah, it's hard to say. So if I had to lean, I kind of like at this point Stanford or Arkansas. I'm leaning probably towards one of those 2. I could see one of them taking on Texas in the final. As far as Ole Miss, or Auburn, the great thing about it is the winner of that will be in the driver's seat Saturday night. So, obviously we'll be frustrated for one of our teams. At least one will be in a good situation. I think the key for Ole Miss having any chance, because they're obviously playing so hot right now, I think they've got to get to 2-0 in the World Series. They've got to win the DeLucia start and the Elliott start. I think it would be really tough for Ole Miss if they get into the losers bracket early. I mean, it'd be tough for anybody, but especially Ole Miss, because I don't know who they would turn to as that number 3 starter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely an issue when maybe you're not having the best relief pitching. And if you have to rely on your starters a lot. One thing that I think it helps Auburn out that I noticed a lot in that Oregon State series is Butch Thompson shuffles in a lot of pitchers. There's a whole lot of pitching depth at Auburn. And even in these games, they didn't allow a lot of runs. He was taking out the starters early when he could see that things were going bad. And I mean, you had Burkhalter pitch 3 innings to win the last game. The middle reliever pitched another 3 innings. And then in game 1, he took out the starter in the 2nd inning, and they were able to only give up 5 runs. So that's something that's good for this Auburn team, but that's the kind of thing that you need right now. Joe, I would say that my favorite, I liked Arkansas from the very beginning of this tournament, and so far I've got no reason to, go against that. But I am very interested to see what Texas A&M does. With the longest odds against them, they were the number 5 overall seed, but I feel like they're being talked about less than any other tournament team in this tournament.
Yeah, they are. And, they won the SEC West. I guess 19 wins in the SEC this year. And their coach, has a lot of history in the College World Series. He was at TCU for years, took them to the World Series 3 or 4, maybe 5 times over the years. And he's just in one season basically revitalized completely this Texas A&M program that last year I think was dead last in the SEC West. And so they're definitely an intriguing team. And, I'm also intrigued, with just the rivalry aspect of, them in Texas and then Oklahoma all being in the same pod.
That's right. And Joe, speaking of Oklahoma, they're a team that not a lot of people thought would be here either. They didn't host a regional. They were a 2 seed. They had to gut their way out. And their victory they had against Virginia Tech was one of the bigger upsets. Virginia Tech was the number 4 overall team. And Oklahoma, the very first game, the guy made a show-stopping catch to win the game for them. And they got beat pretty bad in game 2, but then they came back and waxed Virginia Tech in game 3. And Oklahoma has the opportunity to be the first team ever to win the Women's College World Series and the Men's College World Series. You think about it, there's not been a lot of teams that really have had success in both programs. Probably Florida will be the one that has been the closest to doing it in both with
UCLA.
Sullivan's program. And UCLA has also been quite good, but no team has done it.
Yeah, that'd be quite an amazing accomplishment if Oklahoma does this, especially, with the baseball team being such a surprise to go on this run. Because that Virginia Tech win on the road was very impressive. That was an environment that was also pretty raucous as well. I don't think they had ever hosted a regional or super regional in Blacksburg until this season. So definitely impressive. And the other thing about Oklahoma is they're kind of forgotten team here. I feel like they're one of the last teams that people are talking about as far as a serious contender.
Absolutely, Joe. I mean, no one thought they had a chance in either one of the regionals they've come out of so far. And I definitely think that they are maybe the biggest surprise to me out of all the teams that are in this.
Yeah, because I never can remember them having that much, history with baseball over the years. Maybe like a few super regionals, but not a regular participant in an event like this.
I know they had a coach, the coach before Butch Thompson at Auburn, Sonny Galloway. He was an Oklahoma coach, and I think he took them to a College World Series. That was part of the reason that he was able to parlay in the Auburn job. He never could really do a whole lot in Auburn. He's never had anywhere near the success that Butch Thompson had. But I know that was part of the pedigree that came with Galloway when they hired him.
Okay, gotcha.
Joe, let's end talking about this by looking at what we think is going to happen in this game one between Auburn and Ole Miss. Two teams that couldn't be hotter. One that had a really tough regional they had to go through in terms of the way they had to play. They had a tough game against Miami, a lot of delays. Of course, they beat up on Arizona. And then Auburn, of course, just ran roughshod through the regional they hosted in their home territory. And then also, they had to go and have the really tough super regional where they had to gut out all these wins against a team that was every bit a national championship contender. Probably, like we said, the odds-on favorite in Oregon State if they had made it this far, versus Ole Miss, who got to stay within their own state and really kind of had a cakewalk against Southern Miss. So the question is, which one of those kind of outcomes that you had in the regional, the really tough one you had to fight for, or the easy one, is going to favor this team in game one?
Yeah, it's so tough to predict, when you put it that way. One missing opponent for Ole Miss, not only were you not tested, I talked about you didn't use your closer, Brandon Johnson, which, is a good thing, but it's also, he's going to be kind of rusty. He didn't get to pitch, in a raucous environment. So there will be pressure. It's obviously a lot different in Omaha. Another interesting component, Dan, is Dylan DeLucia, the starter for Ole Miss. He did pitch out of relief, out of the bullpen against Auburn back in March. I think he went 2 or 3 innings. I think he pitched pretty well, but obviously didn't get the start in that game. I know that the 3 games at Auburn were just like blowouts, all 3 of them. I think the other, like either team blew out the other one. Like it wasn't really close. I expect a much different game here because I feel like both teams have figured out their pitching a lot lately in the tournament. I would personally favor Ole Miss just because I do think their pitching is better than Auburn's. And I think that their offense has some versatility at the bottom of the lineup that will help them manufacture some runs. Now, I'm nervous about that pick because, as we both know, I get nervous about some of the decisions that Ole Miss makes, as far as like who to put in, like out of the bullpen and things like that. So I am a little bit nervous, but I would lean slightly Ole Miss.
So, Joe, I went to an Ole Miss Auburn game this year during that series they had up at Auburn, and we went to game 3 of that series. I think it was game 2 of that series, and it was game 3 of that series. And in the first game, Ole Miss had beat up on Auburn. The second game, Auburn had come back and handed it to Ole Miss. And the game we went to, it was a complete beatdown. Ole Miss just dominated Auburn. What was funny is I even called the Tim Elko home run. He got up to bat. I said, well, I've got to bet Tim Elko is just going to go and hit a home run because of the way this game's going. And sure enough, he hit it in the outfield and hit a home run. And I think they beat Auburn like 11-2 in that game, something like that. Mm-hmm. And now both teams were very different than they were back then. I know a couple of Auburn starters too came from the bullpen. They switched that up. So I know Auburn's pitching has gone up exponentially. But I think that the emotions they had in Corvallis, everything that Auburn had to put in to win that series is going to weigh against them in this because that was tough. I mean, the only positive that I can take from that if I'm an Auburn fan in this game is that I feel a lot better about our relievers and our middle relievers at Auburn than I do at Ole Miss. I know that if the game comes down to Burkhalter, I feel like he's going to win. I mean, the guy's an amazing closer, is going to play in the majors. The thing that scares me, though, is what you talked about. I think that Ole Miss has a lot more pure hitters in a lineup than Auburn does. I mean, Sonny D is probably the best hitter that's out there. I think that, he's hitting 392 right now. He's got 24 home runs. He single-handedly got most of the runs in the regional against Oregon State. But outside of him, probably your next best hitter is Blake Rambush. And Rambush had a rough series against Oregon State. So he's going to have to come back from where he was at. Probably the third best guy for Auburn would be Brooks Carlson, who everybody keeps thinking is a brother of Daniel and Anders. He's actually not related. And in fact, he's a foot shorter than them and brunette. But that's like, there's a big drop off between, DeShera down to Rambush, down to Carlson, and everyone else is way below that. So this is a team that, while they had this great outburst in the regionals of hitting, it came back to earth against Oregon State. And so the truth is somewhere more in the middle. And so I think that what's going to happen is either Auburn wins a close game because I like what they have in terms of moxie and playing in tight games, or Ole Miss just destroys Auburn. And I kind of think that with all the emotion that came out, with how they had to gut out that victory against what was truly a team that could have won the national championship, I think there's going to be too much for them in the first game. And I like Ole Miss to actually win this game pretty handily. I'm going to say they win like 10-3.
Okay. So the interesting factor for both of these teams, when you look at Sonny D and Tim Elko and some of these home run hitters, is playing at this ballpark. You can't be as reliant on the home run.
Mm-hmm.
You can hit home runs there, but it's harder. And so I think that it's going to be fascinating to see, how can these teams manufacture runs? We saw both teams do that in the Super Regional to a degree, with Auburn with the squeeze bunt. Ole Miss only had one home run in the 2 games against USM, but can they do this on this stage? But Ole Miss offensively, though, coming into the season, they were supposed to be this kind of team. Like, they just kind of surprisingly struggled. I mean, their offense returned virtually everybody from last year. It was really like, do they have enough arms to pitch? And then now what we've seen in the tournament is that, my goodness, they have like as good a pitching heading into the tournament or heading, as you could imagine for Ole Miss. And that's saying so much, with guys like McCasey that they've had in past years. So, yeah, I mean, just a lot of things I'm fascinated about with this matchup. But yeah, I do have to favor Ole Miss, I think, in this one.
But yeah, we'll see. Like I said, if you're an Ole Miss fan in this, you want the hot start, because I think that's going to be the key right now. I don't see Auburn getting off to a hot start in this game based on what all they had to go through. And you're right. I do think that's going to limit DeShera a little bit, how hard it is to hit a home run. He was actually limited slightly in that Oregon State series because of how hard he had to hit the ball to get out. I mean, that 2-run home run he had in game 3 just barely went out, and that was going to, direct center, and he crushed it. So, I mean, I think that could be a factor right there with Ole Miss having more, versatile hitters for the most part. And I do think, when it comes down to, this is going to be an Elko DeShera debate. I think Elko is the better overall player, especially when it comes to defense, but that Sonny D is the better hitter. So we'll see which one of these stars show up. Right now, my inkling is I think that Ole Miss gets this win probably pretty handily, but you see Auburn come back in that losers bracket, and I think they'll probably beat whoever they play in that.
Yeah, so I think the winner plays the winner of Arkansas Stanford, which would be a really good game. If that was Arkansas Ole Miss, that'd really be something.
That would be, yeah. I mean, that'll be really fascinating to see. You kind of think that if you're Auburn or Ole Miss, if you win this game, you kind of hope Stanford wins and don't have to take on these Hogs that have championship in their mind and they've been so close lately and just been denied. I would much rather take on Stanford either way than I would take on Arkansas.
Yeah. I mean, and then also you have the factor, just the familiarity with the two teams. I feel like, and you can also look, to Auburn being able to beat Oregon State. Maybe that can give, everybody else kind of some SEC Pac-12 confidence.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think Auburn will feel better about taking on a Pac-12 team after just beating the best that there was in the Pac-12 in Oregon State.
Mm-hmm.
Joe,
Right.
before we end, the last thing I want to ask you about is right now Notre Dame. They're a team that just got off beating the number one team in America. Everyone and their mother thinks that it's a done deal that whatever happens with Notre Dame, even if they're going to win the national championship, the Link Jarrett's going to Florida State. What do you think? Do you think that Link Jarrett is going to be Florida State baseball's next head coach as soon as the Fighting Irish take an exit from Omaha?
I mean, it looks highly likely, but you never know. And the reason I say that is college baseball is somewhat unique in the sense that, you see coaching changes from time to time, but like you do a lot of times see a coach that's really good get to a place and just stay there forever. And so that'd be the only reason where I'm like, I don't know for sure. Also, just kind of like the expectation for baseball at Florida State would be just on a colossal level, like so different than Notre Dame. So that's the only reason I'm not sure. But it does seem like everything I've read that it's probably going to happen.
Well, Joe, I heard something interesting today about Link Jarrett. Of course, Mike Martin Jr., who was the coach at Florida State who got fired. His dad, of course, was the legendary Mike Martin Sr., who coached there for 40 plus years, took Florida State to, I believe, like 25 College World Series. And of course, his son got the job for 3 years and didn't quite meet their expectations. I think that 21-7 loss to Auburn, that might have been the death knell for him. Mike Martin Jr.'s roommate at Florida State while he played on the baseball team was Link Jarrett. And apparently they're like best friends.
Oh, wow.
And so you wonder, does that make Link more hesitant to take the job and to succeed him? And maybe think, okay, while this is my dream job, do I really want to go stamp on the shoes of the coach who was my hero and Mike Martin and his son who's my best friend? I don't know. When I heard that today, it made me think more, well, if you're looking at it from his perspective, in Notre Dame, they're not expecting near as much. You're a hero. Right now, you are their most successful coach they have on campus. You are right now. He's gone farther than Mike Bray's ever gone in basketball. While Marcus Freeman's a promising young football coach, he hasn't actually done anything yet. So you do that, you remove yourself, and suddenly you go to Florida State where they're a team that's done everything but win a national championship in baseball. They've been to, almost 30, I think, College World Series, all of them with Mike Martin. Yeah, they never won the national championship. And then, of course, that's what they're all about at Florida State is baseball. They got a beautiful baseball facility. And then, there's all kinds of other successful coaches on campus like Leonard Hamilton in basketball. And I just, it's definitely, I know it's when mama calls, you come home. I'm kind of starting to lean that I don't think Link Jarrett is going to take that job.
Well, the roommate angle is fascinating. I did not know that. I'm glad you told us about that. Because I think about last year when Ole Miss and Mike Bianco, where he was interviewing with LSU, there was talk that, like, if he went to LSU, Ole Miss would target Louisville's head coach, Dan McDonnell, who's been to 5 World Series. And apparently McDonnell would only have done that if Bianco had left for another job. He did not have any interest in taking the job if Bianco was fired because they're good friends. And he actually got one of his starts in coaching by being an assistant for Bianco years ago. And so with that kind of dynamic being real in college baseball, it makes me think that what you're saying here with the roommate angle, probably a good point here too.
Yeah, so definitely a good story to watch right here. I mean, I'd like to see Notre Dame have a little success in the College World Series. But that's going to be a media frenzy of its own to see whether Notre Dame locks him down to an extension or if he's the new head ball coach down in Tallahassee this time next week.
Right.
All right. And speaking of this time next week, we'll be back on the air this time next week. You can listen to all of our episodes on Spotify. You can also follow or subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our videos of our episodes on there. And then, of course, you can also listen to us on Google Podcasts, Apple Play, all these other platforms. You can like us on Twitter at DJ Sports Show, and also become a fan of our Facebook fan page. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.